Welcome to the Corinne True Center for Baha'i History. The center was established by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States in January of 2024. Its purpose is to foster the study of Baha'i history, Baha'i sacred texts, Baha'i philosophical and theological concepts, and world religions from a Baha'i and comparative perspective. I am Robert Stockman, director of the center, and joining me today is Dr. Necati Alkan. He has been fascinated with Baha'i studies most of his life, and he has studied its history, plus Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish. He is a native Turkish speaker, but also knows German and English in an almost native fashion. His master's thesis was about the relationship between the Baha'i faith and Islamic reform movements in the 19th century, completed in 1998. He later expanded it into his PhD dissertation in 2004 about the Baha'is and Babis in the Ottoman Empire and in Turkey, 1844 to the 1920s. The latter was published in 2008 and revised with the title Descent and Heterodoxy in the Late Ottoman Empire, Reformers, Babis, and Baha'is, published by ISIS Press in Istanbul, 2008. Today, Necati is going to talk about something that he's quite an expert about, and that's the secret of divine civilization, because it was addressed to Ottoman reformers, and his dissertation was particularly oriented around Abdu'l-Bahá and the other Baha'i contacts with Ottoman reformers in the late 19th century. So I will turn it now over to Necati Alkan, and I'll add his PowerPoint back to our stage. Welcome, Necati. It's good to see you, and we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. So we have this year is a special year because Abdu'l-Baha composed The Secret of Divine Civilization exactly 150 years ago, and I think we cannot overemphasize the importance of this treatise by Abdu'l-Baha, because every Baha'i who is involved somehow in the betterment of society or contributes to establishing vibrant communities should really know this book that Abdu'l-Baha wrote, which Shoghi Effendi calls Abdu'l-Baha's outstanding contribution to the future reorganization of the world. So it's a very, very special treatise by Abdu'l-Baha, written 150 years ago. So, but before I come to I deal with the contents of the book, which of course I cannot cover today in just 1 hour. What is really important is that we should know about the context of the composition of The Secret of Divine Civilization by Abdu'l-Baha and the global, the world historical context of this piece by Abdu'l-Baha, and why it is concerned with the reorganization of the world and what was going on in 1875 or before that and after that, not only in Iran, not only in the Ottoman Empire, but all over the world, especially in Europe, and what were the factors that led to the genesis of the Babi and Baha'i religions in the 19th century. So basically, The Secret of Divine Civilization is about social action, it's about reform, it's about the betterment of the world. And every Baha'i, I'm sure, knows this statement by Baha'u'llah: the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. And this is actually, those of you who do the Ruhi Institute knows that this is the very first quotation in Ruhi Book 1 about the betterment of the world. And this is what The Secret of Divine Civilization is about. But also this word betterment the Arabic of which is Islah, or the Persian, can mean reform, reformation, rehabilitation, and so on. And it was a code word, actually, of the 19th century Islamic world, this idea about reforming the country, reforming the world, reforming the nation, whatever. So it's a very important word that Baha'u'llah also uses, of course, in a very much broader context. When we look at the 19th century, we see worldwide movements of renewal everywhere, especially religious and messianic movements from the USA to Europe to China. We see political movements starting from the French Revolution in 1789. We see Karl Marx with his communism between 1844 and 1848, which are also significant years for the Baha'i religion. We see the 1848 revolutions in Europe all over, and not only in Europe, which are called the Second French Revolution. So all these movements, new religious movements, new political movements, had the goal of reforming the world in one way or the other, and bringing some change to the existing order. So we have several, as I said, appearance of religious movements that sought renewal and reform. We have, of course, Mormonism in the USA, various Adventist movements that predicted the second coming of Christ in around 1844. We have the Protestant missionaries worldwide, that, for example, the Templar in Germany as well, that went to the Holy Land. We have the Taiping movement in China, which sought to establish they call themselves the heavenly kingdom of the most great peace, actually. We have the Chinese philosopher Kang Youwei in China, also late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, who envisioned the idea there should be global unity as well. We have the various Islamic movements, the Wahhabi movement in Arabia, the Mahdi movement in Sudan, and of course the Babi and Baha'i religions in Iran. And the appearance of these religions or movements that sought renewal were often a reaction to the search for spiritual renewal or liberation, social upheaval, and colonialism. And the goal was to replace the existing order with a better and new order. And I think we need to look at the Baha'i faith, at the genesis of the Babi and Baha'i religions in this global context to understand about the reform idea or the betterment of the world idea in the Baha'i faith. What I would like to share with you is this book of a German global historian, Jürgen Osterhammel, who wrote this book about the transformation of the world, the global history of the 19th century. It's a very thick book. It has about 1,200 pages. You don't have to read all of it, but I think everybody should have a look at this book because it's fascinating how Osterhammel reviews the 19th century and various also religious movements. And it's fascinating to see how he interprets this in the form of reform and renewal. He says even more than the 18th century, the 19th was an age of reforms and departures in religion. And he says many of these, though not all, can be explained with the cliche of the challenge of modernity. He further says that the 18th century in the Islamic world had been an age in which movements of renewal, also seeking authentic roots of piety, appeared outside the established clerical hierarchies. The best known of these movements, as I said, is Wahhabism in the Arabian Peninsula, that condemned nearly all existing variants of Islam as heretical and demanded a radical purification. Wahhabism was not necessarily reformist Islamic thought, but is mainly interesting for its successful state building later, which we call Saudi Arabia.
Were you planning to advance your slides? I'm just curious. You're still on the first slide.
I'm actually advancing it, but let me see. Do you see it now better?
Yeah. Yeah, now it's advancing.
Okay, sorry. I actually advanced it, but so should I go back or just continue?
Yeah, I would just continue,
Right.
where
Okay.
you were.
So among these Islamic movements, we have Wahhabism, as I said, in the Arabian Peninsula, which was not necessarily reform movement, but it's interesting in its successful state building, which we call Saudi Arabia. And then we have in Sudan the Messianic Revolutionary Mahdi movement of Muhammad Ahmad, who declared himself as the redeemer of Islam, as the Mahdi, in opposition to the Egyptian European incursions, with many typical features of anti-imperial reaction. The German historian Osterhammer locates the Babi and Baha'i faith among the universalist movements of the late 19th and 20th centuries. He says, in the sphere of religion, it is problematic to advance a dichotomy between revolt and reform, between messianic movements, often visualizing the future as a return to a mythical golden age of the past, and religious doctrines and practices that propose a rational, cautious adaptation to the changing times. He continues, such a distinction becomes very more plausible, however, if one and the same movement can be shown to shift from the first pole to the second. So which means from this return to a mythical golden age of the past to the second pole, which is the rational, cautious adaptation to the changing times. This was the case, he says, with the Bab movement, the Shiite heresy in Iran, in which Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi advocated the divine rule of God's chosen representatives on earth and finally claimed for himself a prophetic authority based on direct communication with the Almighty that superseded the teaching of the Quran. And then he says, after his execution by firing squad as an apostate and political rebel in 1850, the movement did not collapse but passed on the original charisma as it implemented a series of reforms. A comrade of the Bab, Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri or Baha'u'llah, undertook this task during his decades of exile in the Ottoman Empire, while referring to himself as the universal Messiah, or the reborn Christ, Mahdi, and Zoroaster rolled into in one. He took great pains to recast the teachings of the movement in cosmopolitan terms attuned to the modern world. Following his death in 1892, the Shiite messianism of the founder became the modern Baha'i religion, which after 1910 spread to Europe and America, and today has its spiritual and organizational center in Haifa. Along with Mormonism and Indian Sikhism, it is one of the few new religious creations to have survived from the 19th century. He further says Baha'u'llah was one of the major thinkers of the late 19th century who cut across cultural boundaries. The modern elements in the Baha'i faith were its advocacy of a constitutional state and parliamentary democracy, its support for an expansion of women's rights, its rejection of religious nationalism, its renunciation of the doctrine of holy war, its concern for world peace, and its openness to science. These are really all fascinating remarks by a non-Baha'i about the Baha'i faith. So as we know, Baha'u'llah, with a claim to a new religious mission, called himself world reformer and wrote numerous writings in which he emphasized not only material progress, but also the spiritual renewal of humanity. He addressed, as we know, spiritual and secular rulers of his times and declared himself the promised one of all religions and announced national and international reforms based on justice and were intended to prevent wars and reduce war costs and taxes. So Baha'u'llah overall claims that his purpose based on God's will is nothing but to quicken the world and unite all its peoples, and so emphasizes his support for reform or reconstruction that would be global, though not on secular measures only. And he identifies himself as a world reformer, in line with all previous prophets, all of whom were committed to reformation, he says. Baha'u'llah remarks that when the prophets of God appeared as world reformers, they were always rejected by the people as guides and were branded as instigators of discord. He says, for example, men have at all times considered every world reformer a fomenter of discord and have referred unto him in terms with which all are familiar. And then he quotes the Quran, where it says, were anyone to tell them the world reformer is come, they would answer and say, indeed, it is proven that he is a fomenter of discord. In his writings, Baha'u'llah states that his and his followers' sole aim and concern is the betterment of the world, which is Islah Alam in Persian and in Arabic. And this word Islah actually, which means reform in the reform context of the Ottoman Empire and Iran, was translated by Shoghi Effendi as betterment of the world, to better the condition of the world, to reconstruct the world, or to rehabilitate the fortunes of mankind. And for achieving this, Baha'u'llah says not only his followers in general are asked to be active, but also there's a vital role to religious leaders and the rulers. He says that our hope is that the world's religious leaders and the rulers thereof will unitedly arise for the reformation of this age and the rehabilitation of its fortunes. And this word Islah, which means reform or reformation, occurs many times in the Quran as well, and it has the connotations of to do good, to act rightly, be righteous, to restore oneself, to reconcile people with one another, and to make peace, as it is in Quran 2:11, where the word is translated as reformer, peacemaker, or the one who puts things right. And there's an example in the Quran for a reformer, which is the Prophet Shu'aib, who had admonished his heedless people and said, I desire not save reform so far as I'm able. And closely related to this verse is another, which modernist and rationalist Muslim reformers in the 19th and 20th century have utilized for social reform and progress. And they always quote this verse from the Quran, which says, God changes not what is in a people until they change what is in themselves. So there should be effort in people to change themselves first. And modernist and rationalist Muslim reformers use this concept of Islah for social reform and progress. And there's the strong reform orientation is reflected in the fact that they viewed Islam itself as a means of reforming humanity and its affairs in general. So Islam was the leitmotif in Muslim reform literature. Baha'u'llah goes beyond the concepts of Islamic reformers, much beyond the concept of Islamic reformers. And it's the issue of reformation of the world in the writings of Baha'u'llah, where he repeatedly emphasizes the need and importance of betterment in order to turn the hatred among the people into unity and enable the rulers on earth to abide by God's will. He says that the purpose of the creation of humanity is this Islah Alam, betterment of the world. And in various writings, he is repeating this actually. And he also says this well-known quote that all men have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. And interestingly, when we look at the literal translation of this, the Persian sentences actually all have been created for the betterment of the world. And Shoghi Effendi, as the authoritative interpreter and translator, gave it a broader and more dynamic interpretation. His translation extends the notion of betterment of the world from mere reform or improvement to a continuous dynamic process of advancement of civilization. And his interpretation aligns with the Baha'i teaching on the evolution of society and civilization, of course. And one of the core statements of Baha'u'llah, which I actually already quoted, in building vibrant communities and serving others, is this betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. And as a world reformer, Baha'u'llah's mission was to inspire and guide people towards such behavior thereby contributing to the realization of a more just, harmonious, prosperous, and peaceful world. And this is actually the main concern of the Secret of Divine Civilization. The Secret of Divine Civilization was composed by Abdu'l-Baha in 1875, when he was 31 years old, and it was already translated in his lifetime and published in 1918 as The Mysterious Forces of Civilization by a certain Johanna Dawood, the Baha'i. And then the second translation was by Marzieh Gale and was published in 1957. And as I already said, Shoghi Effendi calls it Abdu'l-Baha's outstanding contribution to the future reorganization of the world. Abdu'l-Baha wrote and published it anonymously first, and The Secret of Divine Civilization, or the Persian name Risaleh Madaniyeh, was addressed actually to a non-Baha'i audience, the people of Iran primarily, at a time when modernization and reform were important contemporary issues in Iran, influenced by Ottoman reforms. Abdu'l-Baha suggests that he was writing as a concerned citizen, offering constructive ideas pertinent to the ultimate well-being of his native land and beyond, actually. The Universal House of Justice, in its message of 26th of November in 2003, in its message to the Iranian Baha'is, refers to the Secret of Divine Civilization in the following words. It is now a little over 125 years since Abdu'l-Baha addressed his open letter to the people of your country. Because of his vital role in a religious community that had been made the object of intense prejudice, the author necessarily refrained from attaching his name to the document. His message, however, could not have been more clear. Speaking out of a profound love for a native land that he had not seen during the long years of exile since his childhood, the master appealed in passionate language for its people to call to mind those days when Iran, quote, was at the heart of the world, quote, and another quote, the source and center of sciences and arts and the wellspring of great inventions and discoveries, the rich mine of human virtues and perfections, quote, end. The time had come, Abdu'l-Baha insisted, when the heirs of the greatest civilization could and must arise and reclaim their heritage. It was Baha'u'llah himself who had instructed Abdu'l-Baha to compose the Risaleh Madaniyeh. In a tablet, Baha'u'llah says, the reason that work was composed is as follows. One day, the most mighty branch of God was standing in this most sublime and most holy presence, when the tongue of the Ancient of Days, exalted be he, spoke these words, O most mighty branch, it would be commendable if some pages were written on the causes of the world's destruction and the means for its reconstruction, in such wise that it would humble the prejudice to a degree that this may prepare them to listen to the rustling of the low tree of utterance, which can be heard in this day. Other themes of this sort were also heard from the ancient tongue, and consequently, that branch of God composed the secret of divine civilization. Baha'u'llah continues in the same tablet. Some are of the opinion that governance, which is conducive to the order, the tranquility, and the advancements of the world, is confined only to persons of great renown. How wretched is that which they have imagined, which with God is the knowledge of all things in the lucid book. The whole of statecraft is concealed in a single remark. Happy are they who have fixed their gaze upon it, and well is it with them that understand. Were they to act in accordance with that which God, magnified be his glory, hath revealed in this connection, all who dwell on earth would behold themselves in a state of peaceful repose. But the eyes are barred from witnessing this, as are the hearts from perceiving it, by reason of what the hands of our servants have wrought aforetime and will wreak henceforth. Verily our Lord is the all-wise, indeed he is the reckoner, the all-informed. In another tablet, Baha'u'llah says, he, Abdu'l-Baha, composed a treatise in the Persian tongue for the people of Iran, who have yet to attain the living waters of divine knowledge. It is exceedingly beneficial. His purpose in having written that treatise was to forbid the people from following the ignorant, and to enable them to observe matters with their own eyes and ears. In truth, if it be duly considered, that blessed treatise hath been and remaineth beneficial for all humankind. Though it seemeth that no mention is made therein of the wondrous, brilliant, and shining themes, meaning pertaining to the cause of Baha'u'llah, yet every discerning soul shall inhale from its inner meaning the sweet scent of the days of God, and every possessor of insight shall behold therein the rays of the day star of truth. The fact that The Secret of Divine Civilization was the second printed Baha'i book in 1882 in Bombay illustrates its importance. And in this regard, Mujan Momin says it was distributed anonymously and is said to have achieved a wide readership among the Iranian intelligentsia, particularly after its printing in 1882. But later, when its authorship became known, no one would admit to having read it, because they knew Abdu'l-Baha had wrote it. Apparently, copies of the Risaleh Madaniyeh are in the Majlis Parliament Library in Tehran, indicating that it was circulating in government circles even in the 19th century. In The Secret of Divine Civilization, Abdu'l-Baha starts his line of argument by referring to Iran's former glories. Now he states Nasreddin Shah has taken the initiative and is exerting effort towards progress and justice, hoping that his reign will rival the glorious past. He calls his Risaleh Madaniyeh as a tribute to the high endeavor of Nasreddin Shah to improve the conditions of Iranian society, a brief statement on certain urgent questions. By referring to Iran's former glories, Abdu'l-Baha says, for example, there are many statements. O people of Persia, look into those blossoming pages that tell of another day, a time long past. Read them and wonder. See the great sight. Iran in that day was the heart of the world. She was the bright torch flaming in the assemblage of mankind. Her power and glory shone out like the morning above the world's horizons, and the splendor of her learning cast its rays over east and west. She was as the pivot of the world. She was the source and center of sciences and arts, and the wellspring of great inventions and discoveries, the rich mine in human virtues and perfections, and so on. Abdu'l-Baha also deplores the backwardness, decadence, and inertia of the Iranian people at that time. He says, O people of Persia, how long will you wander? How long must your confusion last? How long will it go on, this conflict of opinions, this useless antagonism, this ignorance, this refusal to think? Others are alert, and we sleep our dreamless sleep. Other nations are making every effort to improve their conditions. We are trapped in our desires and self-indulgences, and at every step we stumble into a new snare. Abdu'l-Baha in his book proposes reforms in all spheres of the state, elaborates on the need for ethical and secular education, the employment of able statesmen for a just rule, and affirms the question and necessity of parliaments. He addresses Iranians who opposed reform and renewal, the source of which was Europe. True divine religion, says Abdu'l-Baha, enjoins upon the believers to adopt that which will improve society and increase knowledge, no matter where they come from. In this regard, he says, judge this aright. Which one of these modern developments, whether in themselves or in their application, is contrary to the divine commandments? If they mean the establishment of assemblies of consultation, these are enjoined by the very text of the holy verse, and whose affairs are guided by mutual counsel. And again, addressing the dayspring of all knowledge, the source of perfection, Muhammad, in spite of his being in possession of universal wisdom, the words are, and consult them in the affair. In view of this, how can the question of mutual consultation be in conflict with the religious law? The great advantages of consultation can be established by logical arguments as well. But unlike many of the reformers of the Middle East, Abdu'l-Baha does not advocate wholesale importation of European ideas and values, and he does not hold up Europe as an example to be emulated in all respects. While allowing that European science and social administration have certain lessons for the Islamic world, he condemns European society as being essentially superficial culture, which is morally bankrupt. Abdu'l-Baha considers European civilization morally uncivilized. He says true civilization will only arrive when the rulers come together to consult with a genuine desire for peace. They should forego their ambitions for territorial expansion, limit their armaments, and resolve that if any state violated the territory of another, then they would all arise to subdue that state. The specific reforms listed by Abdu'l-Baha in the treatise are as follows, according to Mujan Momen in one of his articles. Firstly, extension of education throughout the country. Secondly, systematization of court procedure, in particular, a definite limit to the appeal procedure for litigation. Thirdly, development of useful arts and sciences, promotion of industry of technology, extension of foreign relations and expansion of trade, guaranteeing of individual rights such as security of property and equality before the law, restriction of the absolute authority of provincial governors and review of their sentences by the Shah and higher courts in the capital, elimination of bribery and corruption, reform of the army with proper provisions, armaments and training, and setting up of councils and assemblies of consultation. But Abdu'l-Baha stresses that the reforms only are important when put into action. Otherwise, it's just a list. And he actually doesn't elaborate this list, but his major thesis in Secret of Divine Civilization is that reform and progress can only be brought about if the individual members of a society are motivated towards justice and high-mindedness. He furthermore says that progress and civilization are dependent on unity and agreement between the individual members of society, and religion is also the best means of achieving this. Religion, Abdu'l-Baha states, is the most powerful instrument for bringing about such a change among human beings, for it provides the motivation for individuals to disregard their own advantage in the cause of justice and the public interest. Furthermore, Abdu'l-Baha says progress and civilization are dependent on unity and agreement between the individual members and society and the religion. That the religion is the best means of achieving this. I think I already said this. And speaking about the men of religion or men of learning, the ulama, he says that they should acquire spiritual and material perfections, religious, scientific, and cultural knowledge, justice and impartiality, capacity sincerely trying to counsel and educate the masses, mildness, compassion, resolution, courage, and etc. They should also be the defenders of the faith in terms of promoting the word of God and increasing the number of believers. The example of spiritual qualities, he says, will attract and inspire human hearts. Then Abdu'l-Baha says, one of the principal reasons why people of other religions have shunned and failed to become converted to the faith of God is fanaticism and unreasoning religious zeal. See, for example, the divine words that were addressed to Muhammad, bidding him to be gentle with the people and long-suffering. Then he quotes the Quran saying, debate with them in the kindliest manner. People in general, Abdu'l-Baha says, should be obedient to the laws of God. Abdu'l-Baha rejects the view that human beings have an innate sense of dignity, which can prevent them from committing evil, since he regards even this sense of dignity as being derived from the education provided by the prophets of God, which is the real source of true civilization. He gives lengthy examples from history of the manner in which new religious impulse was given. For example, Jesus' message or the mission of Muhammad, and was able to regenerate in noble, decadent, and stagnant civilizations. Abdu'l-Bah's unexpressed conclusion is that only fresh religious impulse, which for him is, of course, the religion founded by Baha'u'llah, can revivify the Islamic world, and not only the Islamic world. Abdu'l-Baha states elsewhere, he, Baha'u'llah, hath dressed the world with a garment new and fair, and that new garment is the principles which have come down from God. Now the new age is here, and creation is reborn. Humanity hath taken on new life. The autumn hath gone, and the reviving spring is here. All things are now made new. Arts and industries have been reborn. There are new discoveries in science, and there are new inventions, even the details of human affairs, such as dress and personal effects, even weapons. All these have likewise been renewed. The laws and procedures of government have been revised. Renewal is the order of the day, and all this newness has its source in the fresh outpourings of wondrous grace and favor from the Lord of the kingdom, which have renewed the world. Renewal, Abdu'l-Baha says, will be accomplished through spreading the teachings of Baha'u'llah. Unless the old ways, the old concepts are gone and forgotten, this world of being will find no peace, nor will it reflect the perfections of the heavenly kingdom. If I may conclude with a short paragraph, both Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha wish for the peoples of the world, whether Baha'is or not, that they labor for a new age of cooperation that would lead to world peace, may make the world a new world, to the end that the old earth may disappear and the new earth appear. Old ideas depart and new thoughts come. Old garments be cast aside and new garments put on. Ancient politics whose foundation is war be discarded, and modern politics founded on peace raise the standard of victory. Lastly, we can say that Baha'u'llah, as world reformer, advocated far-reaching principles and goals for global development and progress, and called secular and religious rulers to participate in it, and in fact all people. Yet he and Abdu'l-Baha made the reformation of society dependent on the ethical behavior and active social action of the individual. Thank you very much for your attention. That is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Necati. That was really quite interesting, especially the beginning part. And a lot of people felt that, of course, they hadn't seen the earlier slides. So perhaps you could mention again Osterhamel's, the title of his book. Is it in English or just in German?
It's originally in German, but there's also a German translation, English translation, which is The Transformation of the World, a global history of the 19th century. It's really fascinating in this context, and I think every Baha'i should have a look in that book. It's very, very, very open, very unbiased.
And some people were wanting to get a quick sort of summary list of all of the various movements that you mentioned. You mentioned the Taiping movement, you mentioned Marxism, you mentioned the Templars, you mentioned the Mormons.
Yes.
You mentioned
Yes.
the Adventists. Anyone else that you can think of? I'm trying to remember the list.
Let me see if I can. Okay, let me see.
Here we go. I can add it back to the stage.
Okay, so and then Islamic movements, of course.
Well, the Wahhabis, yeah.
Mahdi movement, and yes, lastly, Babi and Baha'i religions.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned the Adventists, which would also be the Millerites. Paula Haas was asking about the Millerites, but yeah, that's the Adventist movements.
And then, of course, the worldwide Protestant missionary movements, which sought, that was the Second Awakening, which started in the 18th century, and they actually concentrated much on the Holy Land, which was in the Ottoman Empire, of course, and were predicting the victory over Satan, which was Islam for them, of course, and then the main goal was converting the Jews, and the Muslims they couldn't convert because there were problems they were facing, but they concentrated on these so-called heretical movements like the Alawis and the Druze and so on. So that was the missionary, especially Protestant movements.
Yeah, and especially in Iran, and when you get into the middle to late part of the 19th century, they had a lot of hope for the Baha'is because the Baha'is would actually read the Bible.
Yes, that's right.
Whereas the other groups wouldn't. Yeah. So maybe you could summarize again some of the places where the secret of divine civilization is sort of similar or different from these different movements. You mentioned some of the differences with the Islamic movements in particular, it seems to me.
Well, I mean, also, like as also Mujan Momen says, I mean, if you just look at the secret of divine civilization, not knowing it's from Abdu'l-Baha, it could be from any Muslim reformer. So no mention of Baha'u'llah, nothing outwardly. And all the reforms he lists were also suggested by other Muslim reformers, but Abdu'l-Baha really emphasizes, I mean, also others, but he really puts this emphasis on education on all levels, and also his idea of this consultative assemblies about the need of consultation goes further than Islamic reformers actually did. But I think the most important thing is this ethical behavior of the individuals, and which with the Muslim reformers, I think, didn't place much emphasis on it. I mean, they seem to have been dealing like outwardly with reforms, but as far as I also have read and can see, Abdu'l-Bahá's and Baha'u'llah's emphasis is this reform of the self, of the individual, and then reforming the others or the world. Yeah. I think that's the crucial thing.
Yeah, there's this place in the Secret of Divine Civilization where Abdu'l-Bahá quotes I guess it's a hadith about reforming yourself. And yes. I guess Mujan has noted a very, very similar hadith, which was the hadith that was used for justifying the marja at Taqlid, the imitation of the marja. So it's slightly different wording, but it may be just two different variants on the same passage.
Right.
Did from your reading, when Abdu'l-Bahá is talking about the sort of legislative assemblies and things, do you get the impression he was talking about a legislative assembly made up of ulama, for example?
That's this thing. I mean, I think also Mujan mentioned that this wording, majlis or majalis, and similar things which Abdu'l-Bahá uses, I think he means consultative assemblies within the state. Like, I mean, not in the sense of spiritual assemblies we have as Baha'is, but consultation on like parliamentary assemblies that consult. And this was also the idea in the Ottoman Empire, that the limits of the Sultan or the king should be, I mean, the powers of the Sultan should be limited by an assembly or by the parliament. I think that's the idea, that there shouldn't be a dictator, but the elected people, like elected representatives of the people, should come together and consult. That's my understanding of it.
Interesting. Bill asks about the various millennial movements that occurred at that time in the 19th century, like the Baha'is, the Adventists, and the Mormons. And do you see any particular characteristics, I know I could say that word, of them that it may explain why they endured?
Like the Baha'is and the Mormons, or?
And even the Adventists, for that matter.
Why they endured? That's a good question. I guess it's the organization. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe Bill has the answer for his own
Bill
question.
might have an idea about that one, actually.
Please.
Because I'm not quite sure what one would say about that either. Farahieh asks, do we know who in Iran might have received the secret of divine civilization? Do we have any list of individuals, for example?
Not that I know, no. We just know there are copies of it at the Majlis Library in Tehran, but I don't know. Mujan also doesn't mention a list of persons who have read it, but I guess it was read by many. So
yeah, but then there's also a whole interesting question of what does many mean, because how many intellectuals were there? I wonder
yes.
at that time in Iran, perhaps a few hundred.
Yes.
So it was a relatively small group of people.
Sure.
And increasingly, it looks like many of them before the 1890s, when the definition of Baha'i wasn't very clear, many of them may have been sort of quasi-associated with the Baha'i community as well.
Right.
So that would explain perhaps the connection. Let's see. Yeah, Albert mentions he noticed that the Abdu'l-Baha emphasizes the elimination of prejudices. Perhaps he also emphasized people who present opposition to reform as procrastinators, who are interested, whose interests are hidden from what their arguments appear to be. And I suppose that's true of some of the people in Iran who are opposing reform. Yes. Yeah, and Bill notes that Abdu'l-Bahá notes in Secret of Divine Civilization that the problem of the mass is not seeing the hidden motives of political figures. So yeah, right, that is an issue. Yeah, the sincerity of those in power, which gets back to the moral qualities of them. Exactly. That Abdu'l-Bahá was emphasizing so much. That's right. Shoghi Effendi, as you said, noted that it's Abdu'l-Bahá's contribution to the future reorganization of the world. I remember my first experience reading the thing back in, I don't know, the 1980s, was that this was the Baha'i answer to the Christian social gospel movement of about the same period of time, actually. Social gospel movement's a little bit later. It's 1890 through, say, 1915 or so. But there are a lot of very interesting parallels. And I wonder, I am struck by the whole idea that a proposal to reform 19th century Iran would also apply to reorganization of the entire planet. Oh yes, definitely. I mean, that's what Baha'u'llah says in one of the tablets I quoted. He says it rests with the people of Iran, but it concerns the whole humankind. And this is also what Shoghi Effendi says. It's for the whole world. Yeah, but it's I think very interesting that he could single out 19th century problems and that they would be, shall we say, paradigmatic of what we have to do even in the future. And yes. I suppose that's especially true because of the emphasis on moral reform and emphasis on education, emphasis on science. These things are sort of universal, regardless of the century, I suppose. Exactly. That's just why important we should know this treatise, actually, and use it. What else can we say about its diffusion around the world? Do we know how many languages it's been translated into? I wonder. Oh, that I don't know, actually.
I know we have it in English, in German, in Turkish, in I don't know.
Probably French and Italian and Spanish.
Italian, I guess Spanish maybe.
Yeah.
It should be translated in many languages.
Yeah. So it's good to know it's in German and Turkish. Very good. I'm running out of questions, and I don't see any other questions right offhand about the subject. Have you any closing comments that you'd like to make about the book now that it's hit the year 150?
It's I mean, it's. I think it's, as you said, it's timeless. It's concerns every century, and so past and future. So maybe we should try to read it for ourselves, or have study groups or deepenings about it, especially when many of us are involved in these social activities by the Institute. And I think by reading The Secret of Divine Civilization, we have a better understanding of what we're actually doing. Of course, we have the writings of Baha'u'llah, but he instructed Abdu'l-Baha to write this for a certain purpose. So maybe it should be a blueprint for our actions.
Yeah, and I think it's even quoted in, what is it, 14.2, which talks about the framework for action. I think a lot of that some of the content in the framework for action actually refers back to The Secret of Divine Civilization. So
correct. Yes.
That's very much true, I think.
Yes.
Very much true. Well, thank you so much, Necati. We're delighted to have your presentation. We have two more webinars coming up in January. We're done, of course, in December now. On the 11th of January, Janice Ndegwa, who is a doctoral candidate at Stanford University in California in history, will be speaking about the Africa Plan 1950 to 53, a vital precursor to the 10-year crusade. This is a talk that she gave at our conference at Greenacre, but we were unable to record it at that time. So we're going to be able to put it up as a webinar in January. And then a week later, on January 18th, Bill Collins will be speaking based on his new book on apocalypticism. And the talk is called Waiting Ends. The Future is Now, Millennialism and Prophecy in Spiritual Evolution. And that should be quite an interesting talk. It's, as I said, a brand new book that came out just some months ago. And he'll be talking about part of the conclusions that he came to in that book.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone. That's it today from the Corinne True Center for Baha'i History. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. Goodbye.
Bye.